Native American history isn't what most people think it is. It's not just stories of teepees, buffalo hunts, and old legends. It's a history packed with surprising, overlooked, and shocking truths. Some of these facts will make you rethink everything you learned in school, and others will leave you wondering why they've been buried for so long. Did you know that Native Americans weren't even considered U.S. citizens until 1924? Their contributions to the world go far beyond what history books credit them for, from shaping modern democracy to cultivating crops that feed billions. Since immemorial, Native Americans have lived on this continent, from the northern reaches of Alaska to the Gulf Coast of Florida. More than 9 million Native Americans are living in what is now the United States, representing hundreds of tribal nations with incredibly diverse languages, cultures, and traditions. Here are some 9 shocking and controversial facts that will change everything you thought you knew about Native Americans. But first, if you enjoy our content about Native Americans and the Old West, please like and subscribe. Thanks for joining us once again. Let's begin. Imagine walking through pre-colonial North America, where nearly every region had its unique language. Over 300 indigenous languages were spoken globally. Some estimates even push that number to 500. This wasn't just a few different dialects. It was an entire web of cultures, each with its way of communicating, storytelling, and preserving history. But then came colonization, and with it, a relentless attack on native languages. European settlers weren't just interested in land. They wanted to erase indigenous identities altogether. One of the biggest tools for this was language suppression. By the late 19th and early 20th centuries, Native children were being sent to boarding schools where speaking their mother tongue was strictly forbidden. Teachers punished students for using their languages, sometimes even resorting to beatings and solitary confinement. The message was clear: English was the future, and native languages had no place. Despite this brutal history, indigenous communities have fought hard to keep their languages alive. Some, like Cherokee, Navajo, and Lakota, still have thousands of speakers today. Others, however, are on the verge of disappearing. According to linguists, almost all native languages in the U.S. could vanish by 2050 unless major preservation efforts succeed. But there's hope. Programs dedicated to language revitalization are making an impact. Some schools now teach kids in their native tongues, and even apps have been developed to help younger generations learn words and phrases. The resilience of native communities in preserving their languages is nothing short of remarkable, proving that despite centuries of oppression, their voices will never be silenced. If you consider Native American tribes to be only a handful of well-known names like the Cherokee, Apache, or Sioux, in that case, you're only scratching the surface. The United States officially recognizes 574 native tribes, each with its culture, traditions, and history. These tribes aren't just historical footnotes. Many were living, thriving nations with governments, laws, and communities that continue to shape America today. But here's the catch. Not every tribe is federally recognized. Many native groups have fought for decades to gain official recognition from the U.S. government. This process can take years, sometimes even centuries. Without federal recognition, tribes miss out on essential resources like land rights, healthcare, and legal protections. Some groups, like the Lumbee tribe of North Carolina, have over 55,000 members but still lack full federal status. Even among recognized tribes, the fight for sovereignty is ongoing. While tribal nations have certain powers to govern themselves, state and federal laws often challenge their authority. For instance, many tribes have casinos to generate revenue, but strict regulations can limit their economic freedom. Still, Native American tribes remain incredibly resilient. From their ongoing legal battles to preserve sacred lands to the growth of indigenous-led businesses and education initiatives, these communities are proving that their identities are not relics of the past. They are still here, thriving and shaping the future in ways most people never realize. In the early 1800s, newspapers dominated the flow of information, but for Native Americans, they were all printed in English, a language many couldn't read or understand. The news, policies, and debates are all out of reach. But then, in 1828, everything changed. The Cherokee Phoenix hit the presses, becoming the first ever newspaper printed in a Native American language. This wasn't just about news, it was about survival, resistance, and ensuring the Cherokee people had a voice in a world trying to silence them. And it wouldn't have been possible without one man, Sequoyah. Imagine creating an entire writing system from scratch. That's exactly what he did. Until then, the Cherokee language had only been spoken and passed down through generations by word of mouth. But Sequoyah saw what literacy did for European settlers. It gave them power. He spent years developing the Cherokee syllabary, an 85-character system that transformed how his people communicated. Cherokee speakers could read and write in their language for the first time, and with that, they were ready to take control of their narrative. The Cherokee Phoenix wasn't just another newspaper. It was a weapon. It covered everything from local news to U.S. government policies, ensuring the Cherokee Nation was informed and prepared. And it didn't hold back. When the government started pushing harder to take Cherokee land, the Phoenix exposed the injustice. It warned readers about the dangers of forced removal. It fought back against the growing pressure of white settlers trying to erase their culture. At a time when Native Americans were being stripped of their rights, this newspaper stood as a beacon of resistance. But resistance comes at a price. The U.S. government wasn't thrilled about an indigenous newspaper calling them out. By 1834, under intense pressure and financial struggles, the Cherokee Phoenix was shut down. The government wanted it gone, erased, just like they wanted the Cherokee people gone. But the impact? That couldn't be erased. The Cherokee had seen the power of the written word and weren't about to forget it. Today, the Cherokee Phoenix still exists. Reviving and running strong proves that the Cherokee people never backed down. Their language, their stories, their fight, it's all still here. And it all started with a newspaper that refused to be silenced. The United States is often celebrated as a symbol of democracy. But what if we told you that Native Americans practiced democratic governance long before the Founding Fathers even existed? Yes, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, also known as the Iroquois Confederacy. This alliance of 6 nations, Mohawk, Oneida, Onondaga, Cayuga, Seneca, and Tuscarora, formed one of the oldest living democracies in the world. Their system was based on the Great Law of Peace. This constitution outlined leadership, conflict resolution, and decision-making through consensus. Each nation within the Confederacy had a council that worked together to maintain unity, much like a modern-day federal government. Chiefs, called sachems, were not rulers but representatives chosen by clan mothers, meaning women had a crucial role in governance, a concept way ahead of its time. When European settlers arrived, they were shocked by the organization and effectiveness of the Haudenosaunee political system. Benjamin Franklin and other U.S. founding fathers studied their governance structure while drafting the U.S. Constitution. Some historians argue that the Haudenosaunee Confederacy inspired key democratic principles, such as representative government, checks and balances, and unions. Despite centuries of colonization and forced removals, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy still exists today. Its traditions, government, and great law of peace continue to guide its people, proving that indigenous governance isn't a relic of the past. It's a system that has stood the test of time. Imagine being told that the land your ancestors lived on for generations was no longer yours. You had to pack up whatever you could carry and leave. There was no choice, no negotiation, just an order from the government. That's exactly what happened to thousands of Native Americans under the Indian Removal Act of 1830. Signed into law by President Andrew Jackson, the act allowed the U.S. government to forcibly relocate Native American tribes from their ancestral lands in the southeast to designated Indian Territory in present-day Oklahoma. The government framed it as a way to protect Native people from conflict with settlers. But it was about taking land for expansion, no matter the cost. The most infamous result of this policy was the Trail of Tears. On this brutal, forced march, around 100,000 Native Americans, including the Cherokee, Creek, Chickasaw, Choctaw, and Seminole, were driven from their homes. The journey was deadly. Thousands died from disease, starvation, and exposure. The Cherokee alone lost over 4,000 people during the relocation. And it wasn't just about losing land. Native Americans were stripped of their homes, burial sites, and spiritual lands. They were uprooted from places where their families had lived for centuries and thrown into unfamiliar territory where survival was uncertain. The government promised new land and protection, but even that was a lie. Over time, more land was taken, treaties were broken, and native sovereignty was constantly under attack. Even today, the effects of forced removal are still felt. Many tribes continue to fight for land rights, recognition, and compensation for the injustices they suffered. The Indian Removal Act didn't just displace Native people, it left scars that still haven't fully healed. Some history books have falsely painted Native Americans as simple hunter-gatherers, but that couldn't be further from the truth. They were skilled farmers, engineers, and innovators who shaped the land in ways that are still visible today. Think about your favorite foods: corn, potatoes, tomatoes, chocolate. Without Native American agricultural expertise, these crops might never have become staples worldwide. Long before Europeans arrived, indigenous communities had developed advanced farming techniques. They used crop rotation, irrigation systems, and companion planting like the Three Sisters method, where corn, beans, and squash were grown together to support each other's growth. These techniques weren't just about survival, they were about sustainability. Native farmers cultivated the land in ways that kept the soil healthy and productive for generations. Take corn, for example. Indigenous farmers in present-day Mexico started domesticating wild grasses over 9,000 years ago, eventually creating the corn we know today. It became a vital crop across the Americas and later spread worldwide, feeding billions of people. Potatoes, another life-changing crop, were first cultivated by the Inca in the Andean mountains of South America. Today, potatoes are one of the most consumed foods globally, but few people realize they wouldn't exist without indigenous innovation. Then there's chocolate. You can thank the Mayans and Aztecs for that. They were the first to turn cacao beans into a drink, believing it had divine properties. When Europeans got their hands on it, they added sugar and milk. The rest is history. And let's not forget beans, squash, chili peppers, peanuts, and sunflowers, all of which originated from Native American agricultural expertise. These weren't just random crops. Indigenous people developed advanced farming techniques like companion planting, where different crops were grown together to help each other thrive. Without Native American agriculture, global diets would look completely different. The world owes a huge debt to the indigenous farmers who cultivated and perfected these crops long before anyone else. Despite this, many early European settlers and later historians dismissed indigenous achievements. They spread the false narrative that Native Americans were purely nomadic, living off the land without structured societies. In reality, great civilizations like the Maya, Aztecs, and Mississippians built vast cities, managed large-scale agriculture, and even engineered landscapes to improve crop yields. The Navajo Nation is the largest tribal land in the United States, covering about 27,000 square miles across Arizona, New Mexico, and Utah. To put that into perspective, it's bigger than West Virginia and some countries. But despite its vast size, the Navajo Nation's history is filled with struggle, resilience, and a fight for sovereignty. The U.S. government originally forced the Navajo people off their land in the 1860s during what is known as the Long Walk. Thousands of Navajo men, women, and children were marched over 300 miles to Bosque Redondo, a prison-like reservation in New Mexico. Many didn't survive the journey, and those who did faced starvation and disease in harsh conditions. After years of resistance, the Navajo people signed the Treaty of 1868, which allowed them to return to their homeland. But the land they regained was only a fraction of what they originally had. Over time, the Navajo Nation expanded to its current size through negotiations and land purchases. Despite its size, many parts of the Navajo Nation lack basic infrastructure. About 30% of homes don't have electricity, running water, or internet access. Healthcare and education also remain challenges due to historical neglect and limited resources. Still, the Navajo Nation has made significant economic and political independence strides. It operates its government, police force, and court system, making it one of the most autonomous tribal nations in the U.S. The Navajo language remains strong, with thousands of fluent speakers, and the tribe has played a crucial role in U.S. history, most notably the Navajo Code Talkers, who helped win World War II by using their language to send unbreakable military codes. Today, the Navajo Nation continues fighting for resources, land rights, and improved living conditions while maintaining its cultural heritage. While many people associate Native American tribes with reservations, not all tribes have land of their own. There are federally recognized tribes that have no reservation, no land base, and no guaranteed home for their people. This is one of the most overlooked injustices in U.S. history. A tribe's land is often tied to treaties signed centuries ago. However, many tribes were never given land in these agreements. In contrast, others lost their land due to broken treaties, forced removals, or government policies. Some, like the Duwamish tribe in Washington, have federal recognition, but no land, despite having lived in the region long before settlers arrived. For many tribes without land, everyday life is even more difficult. They cannot govern their territory, establish businesses on sovereign land, or access federal housing programs designed for reservations. Maintaining cultural traditions becomes harder without a land base, as many ceremonies and practices are tied to specific landscapes. Some tribes are still fighting legal battles to reclaim land. Others work with state and federal governments to secure land through purchases or legal recognition. The fight for native land rights isn't over, and for many tribes, getting their land back isn't just about ownership. It's about survival, identity, and justice. For most of American history, Native Americans weren't considered U.S. citizens, even though they had lived on the land long before the United States was founded. It wasn't until 1924, with the passage of the Indian Citizenship Act, that all Native Americans were legally recognized as U.S. citizens. But even then, it wasn't as straightforward as it seemed. Before this law, only some Native Americans had citizenship. Those who agreed to assimilate under the Dawes Act of 1887 or served in the U.S. military during World War I were granted citizenship. But for most tribes, being considered American was never a priority. Many saw themselves as citizens of their nations, not of the country that had taken their land. When the Indian Citizenship Act was signed into law by President Calvin Coolidge, it was supposed to grant full rights to Native Americans. However, there was a major problem. Citizenship didn't automatically mean voting rights. Many states still blocked Native Americans from voting using legal loopholes, like requiring land ownership or literacy tests. Some states even argued that Native people weren't civilized enough to vote. It took nearly 40 more years, all the way to the 1960s, for all Native Americans to fully gain voting rights in every state. Even today, Native American communities face barriers when it comes to voting. Many reservations lack polling places, and restrictive voter ID laws disproportionately impact Indigenous voters. Some states even use gerrymandering to weaken Native political power. Despite this, Native Americans have continued to fight for representation, making their voices heard in elections, local governments, and national politics. The fight for citizenship was never just about being part of the U.S. It was about having a say in the laws and policies that directly affected Native people. While progress has been made, the struggle for full equality and recognition remains. And with that, we wrap up today's episode. Thank you for joining us once again. We hope you enjoyed this video. Remember to hit the subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you will be the first to see our new updates. See you in our next video.